Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a very senior professional turned coach from Mumbai, India, Mr. Rajiv Chelladurai. Rajiv, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Ashutosh. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Rajiv is a leadership coach. He's an author and a speaker. He's the founder of Ergos Mind, and he's the author of 4 books. So, Rajiv, before we start, tell me a little bit about your journey and what made you move from a senior corporate professional to a coach.
Yeah, that's an interesting question.
Mm-hmm.
I started off really at the lower end of the pyramid about 28 years ago, when I took a sales role. And at that point in time, it was telecom, but managed to grow the ranks, moved into an industry which I would call my own, which was the life insurance when the privatization actually happened.
Okay.
Was fortunate to work with some good organizations, grew up the ranks. But I think in the year 2016, we went through a personal crisis. One of my daughters was actually really ill, and she was battling for life. I remember sitting outside the ICU, and at that moment of all times, it was like an epiphany moment. It dawned on me the brevity of life, that life is short, and therefore it's important to be doing what you believe your purpose is. And I believe my purpose was to make a difference to people by speaking, inspiring, and teaching. And therefore, I took that rather bold move to move away from a great career and to do what I believe I was called to do. So that was the reason why.
Amazing. And then I guess you set up Ergos Mind. Yeah. So tell me a little bit about Ergos Mind and your motivation to start it.
Yeah, so I was clear that the time was right for me to make this pivot in my life. And therefore, I set up this firm called Ergos Mind, which is really means, faithfully finish and have the mind to faithfully finish. So I was clear that I wanted to focus on the aspects of leadership. That was my focus area. Secondly, I also wanted to focus on areas of behavior, so that I think when you put both together, it really enables the individual or the organization to convert that potential into performance, to become the best version of what the individual can do. So at Ergos Mind, we do a lot of leadership initiatives. We normally follow a 3-fold approach, which is use an assessment, use the coaching, and use a continual learning intervention for individuals. So I work with a few corporates, fortunate to have had the association over the last 5 years, and the relationship has actually gone deeper. Yeah.
Wonderful. And you also talk about your SIT, which is Speak, Inspire, and Teach. Yeah. Tell me a little bit about this and give me some examples.
Right. So I wanted to really crystallize what my purpose was. And I came across this acronym after a bit of thought, a bit of prayer. And I said, hey, this is what I want to be doing, right? I want to be speaking. I want to be inspiring people. And I want to be teaching them to become their best version of themselves. So that forms the basis of everything I do. I follow what is called a purpose list rather than a to-do list. So every day I look at, hey, am I doing elements of speaking? Am I doing elements of inspiring? Am I teaching somebody, right? If I'm doing that, then I'm living out my purpose on a day-to-day basis.
Okay.
And I really found, Ashutosh, that, that we live such fast-paced lives, and, we are up to date in terms of expertise, in terms of, the latest innovations, but there is a short supply of inspiration. And inspiration is that X factor which helps the individual to stretch beyond, right? To believe when life's difficult. So I said, hey, can I become a distributor of inspiration?
Okay.
And that's what I do. I do it in a structured way, do it unstructured. That's what I do. Yeah.
Wonderful. So let me now move to your avatar as a coach.
Right.
when when I finished my MBA from Jamnalal Bajaj and started working, coaching or mentoring was either done by a family elder or by someone senior in the company who took a liking for you. Over the last 3 or 4 decades, it's become a profession. It's become formalized, and people are willing to pay for it.
Right.
I'd love to get your perspective on what has changed in the world of coaching and why are people willing to get formal coaching?
Right. I think that's a great question. A couple of things have actually happened, and I completely agree with your genesis or the evolution of coaching as we've seen it to where it is today. Because there has been generational changes that have happened. Right. In the previous generations, you took advice, you sought for advice and things like that. But I think we have come to a time where people realize that, I need to work the processes. I need to get the knowledge and skills. But how do I lead myself? What is the mindset shift that I need to make in order to be able to solve the problem, seize the opportunity to achieve the goal? So I think there's been a lot of realization of that fact. That's number one. Second, I think even organizations have begun to believe the value of coaching, right? Where it's not just about reviews. It's not about, not even just about goal setting, right? But how can you enhance people's belief? How can you enhance people's desires to get better?
Right.
And the need for professional help. I think that need has been kind of valued right now. And therefore, there's been this need for, let's get coaches who can make a difference.
Very, very interesting. And again, one more question before I go further into coaching is that, 15 years ago, if some organization decided to get a coach for one of their managers, it was assumed that this person was on the fast track and he'd been identified. Oh, now he's getting external or she's getting external intervention. Has this changed now?
Yes. Okay. I think there are different needs for coaching. So there is the performance enhancing coaching. There is the hypo or high potential requirement of coaching. I've also found that there is the coaching requirement for people who are kind of multitasking, because what's changed right now is you now have one person doing probably 2.5 people's job, right? And there is burnout is a reality. So there is coaching for that requirement. So I think there's different nuances in terms of coaching. It's not just seen as a single dimension. And therefore, I think it's also important for coaches to be able to understand the exact gap that they are trying to add value into, right? And therefore, be able to deliver for the exact requirement. So yeah, it's become multidimensional right now.
Fascinating. What a great response. Thank you. So moving on now, Rajiv, given the fact that you spend time in the corporate world, you're an author, you're a speaker, how has your background supported your coaching philosophy, your style, and your values?
Right. So from a background perspective, I've always tended to be more a people person. I was in distribution and sales for almost all my career. I went into managing transformation and things like that, but always managed a team.
Sure.
Right. And I always felt that, it's very important that you build relationships of trust. You are people focused. And my value is this, right? As a leader in a corporate setting, you are entrusted with two responsibilities. One is, and I'll talk about the second one first, is to ensure that you deliver the profits, right? But the first and primary is that you develop people. So people develop, you develop people, deliver profits. But unfortunately, the focus has gone too much on, hey, how do I deliver the profits? And the developing people has kind of slipped. But for me, intrinsically, that's always been at my core. I've always, even from school, I've enjoyed speaking. I've enjoyed, kind of listening to people, understanding. So I think all of these elements, were kind of wired to me, and that's when purpose came. looked at your potential, and that marriage between purpose and potential happened. And I think that's really helped me to be effective as a coach. I'll just say one more thing, Ashutosh. What has also helped is having the industry experience, right? Been there, kind of led teams, had your highs, had your falls. You know how the organization works, the people dynamics, and then you add the coaching skills to that. I think that is a pretty good combination for you to perfectly understand what is required from a coachee, and be real in that conversation.
Fascinating. The other thing that happens to all of us in our lives is that we get a lot of support from different people, from family elders, from senior colleagues, from our peers, from our children. My question to you is, how have you been shaped by people in your life? And how are they influencing you as a coach today?
That's again another interesting question.
Thank you.
I've been fortunate to have worked with some great people, great leaders. And I think really that's a blessing from God. Truly. I mean, just to have the opportunity to be, kind of working under these great leaders. And that has really shaped me to watch leadership in action, to watch how these people would respond, to watch how they would listen. These are gentlemen who are super highly qualified. These are gentlemen who had CEOs reporting into them, right? But still would be humble enough to seek your view, would be humble enough to listen, would be humble enough to spend time with you, and even tell you, hey, Rajiv, you know what? I think you're messing up here. And for me, that has been a solid influence on me. And what I've received, as the saying goes, freely you receive, freely give. And that is, in a sense, saying, hey, this is payback time for me. How can I actually give back to people what I've received from these great leaders? So yeah, these have been. And also, just one more point, I've been deliberate to have mentors, Ashutosh. I've always had mentors at different stages in my life, where you go ask them out for coffee, ask them for lunch, be completely open, transparent to them, say, this is what's working, this is what's not working, and be open and accountable to them. So when they say, hey, I think you need to fix this, right? So be accountable, go back and say, it's what I tried, this worked, this didn't work. So those relationships have also helped me and shaped my thinking.
Fantastic. My next question to you is about culture. I've spoken to many people around the world, and I've said that most of us in India have generally believed, let my work do my talking. And if you go to the US, people are much more vocal about every little thing that they do. My question to you, Rajiv, is how does culture impact coaching?
I think it plays an important role, because often culture becomes the lens through which you see yourself, evaluate yourself, and also culture sometimes becomes a boundary with which you are called to operate with. So I think from a coaching perspective, what I tell my coaches is, let your work be worthy, but don't try to find your self-worth through the work. Right? I think, let me just expand on that a little bit, right? Make sure you're pursuing excellence in what you do. But don't let the outcomes of your work determine your levels of confidence, your self-values, and so on and so forth, right? So that's number one. Second is, you've got to be aligning with corporate culture that's there, more from a vision, mission aspects of it. But you got to differentiate between culture that's set in from an organization and culture of people that come around, right? Because we're all bringing baggages of ourselves. So don't make that differentiation. Understand what is the vision, mission, way of doing things, the way of life of an organization. Align with that, and differentiate between what the baggage of people bring in, which also becomes a culture within a team. differentiate between that, know what to align with, right, is what I would, what that would be my advice to actually people to do it. And just talk, what is culture in a team? Culture is really an aggregation of individual character.
Correct.
Right. So if it's just the aggregation, you walk into a restaurant, for example, as a customer, you can experience the culture that's there as a customer, because the way people serve you, the way people are, how hospitable are they cheerful, are they coming back to you on time, are they smiling? All of that is just the aggregation of individual character, which becomes culture. So this is the way I would view that.
Interesting. So I've got two more questions for you on coaching before I move to your books. My next question is that it's often asked by coachees, how do I evaluate my coach? What are your thoughts?
One is, who is doing most of the talking? Right? If the coach is doing most of the talking, that's not a great sign, really.
Correct.
Okay? That's number one. Number two is, evaluate your coach by the quality of questions asked. Okay, that's very important, right? So what are the questions causing me to think? Are the questions challenging? Are the questions provoking me, right? And most importantly, are the questions helping me to dig deep and find the answers from within me? Very often, I mean, almost always, the answers are within the individual.
Correct.
Right? So that's the role. Third is, how interested is the coach? Is the coach just saying, hey, okay, 1 hour, I'm going to get paid so much? So is the interest in terms of remuneration? And that becomes very obvious, right? Or is the interest on the individual? And that can be felt. So how passionate, how engaged, how interested? So I think these are three ways I would evaluate a coach if I were to choose.
Very interesting. And I'm so glad you didn't say what so many other people say, that, if your chemistry is good, then it's fine. Thank you. My next question to you, Rajiv, is about the millennials and the Gen Zs.
Yeah.
They have now started to move into leadership roles in companies.
Yeah.
They come in with a very different mindset. And I'm from the boomers generation. I'm 65 years old. And I have a lot of respect for the fresh perspectives millennials and Gen Zs are coming in with. As someone who's a coach, I'd love to get to hear from you. What are the areas millennials and Gen Z leaders need to be coached in?
Great question. So I think if I have to think and answer that carefully, it would be from a team culture, right? How do we work as a team? I don't want to sound judgmental, but I think a trait that is often seen with the generation that you mentioned, they are largely more individual driven, very individual focused. But having said that, they also like to operate from a teamwork perspective rather than that. So how can you kind of bring them into a team culture? I think that's number one. A second aspect would be, these are folks who think on their feet and they think very fast, right? How could they actually practice the pause? How could they pause? How could they kind of spend time kind of listening to different points of view? So that would be a second. Practicing the pause, active listening would be another area that I would look at. Managing upwards becomes important because very often the people that they need to manage upwards in terms of stakeholders are folks who are belonging to another generation, right? So what does it take to manage upwards? What does it take to understand and empathize where the other person is coming from? Different styles, would become important. So for me, these would be the top three.
Okay.
I would look at in terms of coaching millennials.
Wonderful. So Rajiv, now let me move to the next segment. And this is about your books.
Right.
Tell me about your books.
Okay. So my first book is a book called God's Instruction for Today. The acronym is GIFT.
Okay.
I wrote that in 2014. I'm a man of faith. So I looked at answering everyday issues from the lens of faith. So that was my first book that I wrote. And it's also, compilation of many of my speeches that I've made, right?
Okay.
On that subject. My second book, interestingly, was a book called Wisdom Workout.
Mm-hmm.
And I try to differentiate between wisdom and knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
And looked at the application of wisdom in important areas. For example, wisdom in the pursuit of purpose, wisdom in the pursuit of excellence, wisdom in communication, wisdom in managing teams, and so on and so forth. Right? What are some applications? So I try to bring in some application points there with application questions where the reader can actually answer and look at how can I apply this in my life. That was my second book. The third book was 2018. It was a book called Fearless in Battle. Now, I mentioned a little while earlier, my daughter went through, and she's still going through, a tough battle. But this book actually captured the battle that my daughter went in 2016, where we almost lost her.
Wow.
And the lessons that we learned in traversing that very, very difficult phase. So what are the lessons we learned in facing that adversity? Now, these were lessons which were specific to the adversity that we faced, but it's generic to any other adversity people can actually go through, right? So what are those principles that you can put together? So I weaved it through an actual story of what we went through and what were the lessons that we went through. So that was the third book. And a book I recently kind of published along with a friend of mine called Andy Iyer is his name. We wrote a book called Leadership Principles, and it has 10 principles, and each principle is presented in the form of a story. I think I got the name wrong. It's Leadership Parables, which has 10 leadership principles. And parables because it's a story. So 10 leadership principles presented in stories, application questions, and a QR code at the end for a short video about the subject. Wow. So that was what came out, I guess, 3 months ago.
Fantastic. Well, I'm going to ask all my viewers and listeners to go and check out your books on Amazon.
Thank you.
I'll go and check them out myself. And I always have a lot of time for authors, Rajiv. So thank you for talking about your books. Rajiv, my last question to you, and this is for the many, many people who will listen to our conversation. Based on your amazing journey and your own personal experiences and you being a coach, what would you say are 3 lessons you would want our viewers and listeners to take away?
Number 1 is pursue purpose. Purpose is your why. Right? You need to understand your why. And I would say that we pursue success, and success could mean different things for different people. It could be net worth, it could be network, it could be number of followers you have, and all of that stuff, right? But you can be successful but not purposeful. But when you are purposeful, you'll always be successful. Right? So purpose. Second is make a difference, right? Ask yourself every day before you go to bed, hey, have I made a difference at least to one person today? Right? It could be a colleague, it could be a customer, it could be the security guard in your society where you live, it could be your family member, but are you making a difference? Always look at making a difference. Every time you make a difference, you're actually moving forward, you're progressing, right? So that'll be a second. Third, I will say value the valuables in life. What are the valuables in life? Ironically, the valuables in life are what money cannot buy. Right? So it is, I would say it's faith. I would say it's family over fortune. I would say it's health over wealth. I would say it's memories, creating memories, not just money. Because when we go, we leave behind the money. I'm not saying money is not important. It is important, but don't be so obsessed with money that you don't have time to create memories. For me, these would be the 3 lessons that I would.
Wonderful, wonderful. Rajiv, on that note, and your 3 amazing lessons: pursue purpose because that is your why, make a difference in the life of someone every day, and value the valuables in life. Thank you so much for speaking to me. Thank you for talking to me about, first of all, thank you for sharing your epiphany moment. And I sincerely hope your daughter gets well absolutely soon. Thank you for talking to me about your own journey as a coach and sharing with me some very wise words about coaching. Thank you also for speaking to me about your books. Thank you again, and good luck.
Thanks, Ashutosh. Thank you for having me, and I enjoyed being here, and I wish you the very best.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.